Despite the sweeping statement of this video's title, it's best to keep in mind that Africa is a massive, diverse continent with many different countries within it with different cultures and attitudes. While the title may perpetuate harmful stereotypes about the continent, it's undeniable that most African countries tend to look dirtier compared to countries in Europe, the Americas, or even Asia. For instance, the biggest city on the continent, Kinshasa, appears dirtier than New York City, the largest city in the United States. But as mentioned earlier, it's harmful to stereotype countries in Africa as dirty. However, within the same breath, it would be rather dismissive and short-sighted to ignore the reality that they do, on average, appear dirtier. But there are good reasons for this. Poverty and the lack of proper sanitation and waste disposal are the major reasons for African countries seeming less clean. There's also a lack of organization, regulations, and unified public support and awareness to keep public spaces clean. In addition to this, there is an often ignored reason for why the continent, and more specifically countries in West Africa, appear dirtier compared to their counterparts both internal and external. And this reason is because of a seasonal weather pattern. Understanding and knowing about this season is instrumental in understanding why, when added on top of the limited access to proper waste management, most West African countries seem dirty. And this begins by looking at the landscape and geography of the continent itself. The continent of Africa, for the purposes of understanding the complexity of West Africa's appearance, can be divided into two main biomes: desert and not desert. West Africa happens to lie below the most massive desert on the planet, the Sahara Desert, and every year, between November and March, wind blows dust from the Sahara all over West Africa. This dust also makes its way into the upper atmosphere and is transported to the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. In South America, this phosphorus-rich dust serves as a vital nutrient for the Amazon rainforest, but in West Africa, this dust is largely unwelcomed as it announces the season of Harmattan. Harmattan, to make it easier to understand, is basically the opposite of winter, but with some similarities. During Harmattan, temperatures in West Africa can be as low as 48 degrees Fahrenheit and as high as 86 degrees Fahrenheit. For a region with an average temperature of 65 degrees Fahrenheit, a drop to 48 degrees is rightfully considered freezing temperatures, and this is where its similarities with winter stops. Harmattan is a dry season that brings desert-like conditions to West Africa. A more detailed explanation for this involves the axial tilt of the Earth and its rotation around the Sun. But to keep things short, since this is in the Weather Channel, Harmattan happens when the sun shines more directly on Africa. Because of this, a high-pressure area is created over the Sahara Desert, about 30 degrees north of the equator. Because of this high-pressure zone, wind tries to move to lower-pressure areas, and they do so by spreading toward the equator, forming the northeast trade winds. The same high-pressure area is also formed 30 degrees south of the equator, and the wind there also moves towards the lower-pressure equator, forming the southeast trade winds. When these two winds converge, they create the intertropical convergence zone. Because the equator receives more sunlight, the air rises at the intertropical convergence zone, because just like a hot air balloon, heated air rises. This causes clouds to form and leads to heavy rainfall in areas below or around the convergence zone. During Harmattan, this intertropical convergence zone is located around the Gulf of Guinea because the sun shines less on the northern hemisphere and more on the southern hemisphere, resulting in less rainfall in West Africa. So, when the cold, dense air of the wintry northern hemisphere spreads more southwards, creating a high-pressure area over the Sahara Desert and moves to lower-pressure areas in the form of the northeast trade winds, it picks up dust from the Sahara and indiscriminately showers West Africa with it for 5 straight months. Combined with the dryness of Harmattan due to the lack of rain, the countries within West Africa become a hotbed for terrible, cold, dusty weather and consequently become dirty, because the dust of the Sahara cannot simply be brushed off. Roads become dusty, buildings get blasted with dust, and anyone who takes a step outside comes back home with dusty clothes. There's simply no escaping it. And when Harmattan ends at the end of March and the intertropical convergence zone moves northwards as the northern hemisphere gets more sunlight, West Africa starts experiencing heavy rainfall. And when you mix the amounts of dust from Harmattan with this heavy rainfall, the buildings, roads and other infrastructure blasted with the Harmattan dust look even dirtier as the rain turns the accumulated dust into mud. But as mentioned earlier, this weather condition, while instrumental in understanding why West Africa appears dirty, is not the only reason why it appears so. There's plenty of other factors, including a lack of regulations, limited access to proper waste management, and a lack of unified public support and awareness to keep public spaces clean. The first part of this video talked about the season known as Harmattan and the role it plays in making West Africa appear dirty. While this seasonal weather helps explain how the environment perpetually seems dirty due to a natural phenomenon, it doesn't explain the artificial factors that also play a key role. For instance, these are images from the most well-known and popular cities in West Africa. The one thing that remains constant in all these images are plastic pollution and a lack of waste containers. With no waste containers in sight, waste, not limited to just plastics, accumulates out of control from daily activities. This has in turn created a culture within most West African countries that tolerates rampant and unchecked pollution, even within market spaces. This lack of proper waste disposal is pervasive throughout West Africa because their people and governments have failed to successfully encourage and maintain regulations to keep public spaces clean. And this is because the infrastructure for proper sanitation simply doesn't exist. According to the World Health Organization, less than 40% of the West African population has access to proper sanitation infrastructure. As a result, many people in the region resort to disposing their garbage at unregulated and unofficial landfills, and even sometimes in waterways. Because of a lack of proper infrastructure and management, official landfills also often overflow, posing a hazard and contributing to a dirty appearance. On top of this, West African countries, like most countries within Africa, have become a dumping site for developed countries. Old technologies ranging from cars, computers, printers, and even old clothes are shipped to African countries as a means of disposal to bypass strict regulations in the source country. While some of these items can be repaired or reused, most are irreparable and often end up at sites like Abloboboshi in Accra, Ghana. Until its recent demolition in 2021 by the Ghanaian government, this e-waste site was one of the dirtiest and polluted not just in Africa, but the entire world. Electronic waste from developed countries in the West often ended up here, and those that were irreparable were scavenged or burned to extract valuable metals to resell in an unmanaged, unregulated, and informal manner. The toxic byproduct of scavenging and burning ended up in the Korle Lagoon, creating a toxic waterway that overflowed into the surroundings on its way into the Gulf of Guinea. With its demolition in 2021, there's hope that sites like this will not pop up again, but that is very unlikely unless strict regulations and guidelines are instituted within West African countries to decrease the amount of e-waste that comes in and how they are managed. Because sites like Abloboboshi exist at smaller scales within most cities and towns in West Africa. Fortunately, there are now efforts to keep West Africa clean involving both private companies and community-led events. At the forefront of this is Zoomlion Ghana. It is involved in a range of waste management services, including the collection, transportation, and treatment of solid and liquid waste. And it operates in Togo, Angola, Zambia, Equatorial Guinea, Liberia, and has plans to start operations in other West African countries like Sierra Leone and Nigeria. Community-led campaigns and individual contributions are also heavily shaping the discourse around keeping public spaces clean. Overall, West Africa's appearance is due to a multitude of factors ranging from the weather to a lack of proper waste management. Although stereotypes about West Africa or Africa's appearance can be harmful, the unfortunate reality is that, on average, countries within Africa appear dirtier compared to countries in America, Europe, and Asia. This harsh reality needs to be acknowledged and accepted before real changes can occur.